鐘就都夠人，咁我哋就開始今日嘅會議。
Members, we have attained the quorum. Let's proceed with the subcommittee on road traffic public light buses limit on number notice 2016. Under House Rule 22 and Annex 4, I'm inviting nomination for the chairmanship of the committee. We need to have one member making the oral nomination to be seconded by a member for the vote for the nomination to be valid. Mr. Ben Chan, I nominate Mr. Frankie Yik, and Mr. Poon Siu-ping second. I accept the nomination. Any further nominations? If not, I have been elected as chairman. Do we need a vice chairman, though? If not, let's get started. Members, please note that due to the adjournment of the Council meeting on October 19th, the motion to extend the scrutiny period of the notice was not moved by the Chairman of the House Committee at the Council meeting on the 19th of October, and that's the road traffic public light buses limit on number notice 2016. As such, the scrutiny period expired on October 20th. While no amendment could be made to the notice due to expiry of the scrutiny period, the subcommittee may still invite the administration to note members' views and concerns. All right, shall we invite the administration in, please?
好，喺呢度係歡迎政府嘅。
I'd like to welcome government officials to today's meeting. With us, Mr. Andy Chan, Deputy Secretary for Transport and Housing, Ms. Crystal Ip, PAS, Mr. Angus Watt, Assistant Secretary of the Bureau, Ms. Stella Lee, Assistant Commissioner of the Transport Department, and Mr. Esmond Poon, Principal Transport Officer. All right, please. Chairman, thank you. Good afternoon, members. As Chairman said a moment ago, the scrutiny period may have expired. We still would like to hear what members have to say. Let me set the scene first. This is a technical amendment. Basically, this is done under Section 23(2) of the Road Traffic Ordinance. The Chief Executive in Council can, by publication of notice in the Gazette, specifies the number of registered vehicles. Under 23(3), LegCo can, by resolution, extend the validity period. Now, this has been said that this can be extended. This started in 1979. At that time, by way of this notice, the government fixed the cap at 4,350. It's been 40 years now, and the LegCo would endorse a resolution to extend the cap number every couple of years. And this has been going on for 40 years. The last time the extension was granted was in 2011, and this will expire on the 20th of June this year. Under the public transport policy, it is underpinned by public transport with railways as the backbone. Other modes of transport play supplementary roles. The role of PLBs, or public light buses, is to provide supplementary feeder service as well as to serve areas with relatively lower passenger demand or where the use of high-capacity transport modes is not suitable. So we have always imposed a cap on the number of public light buses, and the number stands at 4,350. 70% are green minibuses, 30% are red minibuses. The PLB patronage is approximately 1.8 billion passenger trips. This corresponds to a generally stable share of around 15% of the public transport market over the past 5 years. But as the railway network is expanding, there is a need to make adjustment to the role of the PLBs for them to play the supplementary role. Now that's the role of the public light buses in Hong Kong. Why do we maintain the number at 4,350 and we consider it to be appropriate? Now why is it that this number is appropriate? The public light buses may be operating different routes as the operating costs are rising in line with inflation, and it is very difficult to hire drivers. The trade is expressing the point that it is difficult, increasingly difficult for them to operate. 6% of the route packages are not really viable. So there is no condition for us to increase the number of public light buses. In the middle part of last year, the Transport Department consulted the trade. And they support an idea of maintaining the cap of 4,350. The rationale is that it is sufficiently difficult for them to operate, and the increase in the number would be detrimental to their operation. For other modes of transport, I'd also maintain that the government should maintain the cap number. Last year, in November, and we consulted the transport panel and also the TAC on this very subject. And this cap of 4,350 got the support of both committees. We would like to maintain this for 5 years until 20th of June 2021. And as per usual practice, we submitted a resolution to the LegCo for the validity period to maintain for 5 years. However, since LegCo had to deal with a huge volume of business, and the business couldn't be handled before the expiry of the period, the C-in Council issued a notice in the Gazette to maintain the period for 1 year till the end of next year, or middle part of next year. Before the expiry, the administration will be submitting a resolution to the Council again for the period to be extended. Now that will happen before the end of the expiry period in the middle part of next year. We're also discussing with the community the carrying capacity. The minibuses may take up 15% of the market share, and the services have been stable. As a matter of fact, for certain routes, the demand does outstrip supply. And it is against this background that the trade is proposing an increase in the carrying capacity. In June this year, the government put this to the TAC for the carrying capacity to be increased. We have set out the details for the deliberation. We have listened to the views of the TAC, and we are in the process of analyzing the details. And before December, we should be able to bring the TAC up to date on the progress. Right, I throw the floor open for questions. And Mr. Ben Chen. We have plenty of time. Let's impose a 4-minute cap on members first. Well, Chairman, we discussed this last year. It is not an issue which is controversial. There is still some room for discussion. I don't have any trouble with the 5-year extension. However, I've got some questions for the administration. The validity period can be shortened or can be extended. Now, before the 5 year is up, can the administration, through this procedure, bring this up at the let's go? Do we have to wait 5 years if there is any reduction or extension? Well, let me explain this. Every time we extend, it would be for 5 years. Before the middle part of this year, we would have liked to have these extended for 5 years, but that let's go couldn't get around to this. So instead of resorting to the resolution, the Chief Executive in Council issued a notice for an extension of 1 year. So this will take us up to the middle part of next year, but before mid next year, we will come back to members seeking an extension for 5 years. And there will be still opportunity to discuss the number of 4,350. Now, this is not cast in concrete. This is open to discussion at the moment. The number is providing stable service. Some routes are operating with difficulties. For other services, for other routes, the demand outstrips supply. So we're not merely talking about the number of vehicles. We're talking basically about the carrying capacity. There is no need to change the number of vehicles. What we have to discuss would be the carrying capacity. This will be discussed at the TAC. So members don't have to be worried. Before the middle part of next year, we can still discuss whether it is desirable to change the number of 4350 and also make the extension for 5 years. Mr. Chen. Well, Secretary, I think you've misunderstood my question. Every time we extend, it would be for 5 years, but in the interim period, if there is strong preference for adjustment to the 5 year, will the administration be bringing this up here at Let's Go, or are you going to do anything? Or is it the case that we can't discuss the period until 5 year period is up? Can there be any change to the number of years? Well, my understanding is that if the government issues a notice, it would be for 1 year. But when the extension is done by resolution, there is no limit. In the past, it has been 5 years. If the administration, it is for the administration to put a resolution to the council, and if the council raises the issue, we have to follow all the procedures. If there are views in the trade, and if the government subscribes to the idea, we can put this under review. That should be fine.
Next, Mr. Wuchiwai. Thank you. There isn't much controversy in the cap of 4,350. But I'd like to hear from the Assistant Secretary in terms of the operation of PLBs. We know that the cap is 4,350, but how many public light buses are actually in operation? It's in full capacity. What I mean is that how many of these light buses are operational? In the footnote in the paper, you said the government would limit or contain the total number of PLBs where possible. This is the government's policy. Would you actually execute this policy? Are you going to address changes in our society? I think this policy was set a long time ago, so there were a lot of restrictions at that time. For example, they weren't allowed to go into Tolo Harbor. Would the government consider relaxing the restrictions to allow more flexibility in designing the routes? And this way the PLBs can be deployed more effectively. For the number of vehicles, I would invite the TD to answer that question. If not, we can also answer in writing after the meeting. I think you are referring to footnote 3 on page 3. The government's established policy is to contain and, when possible, reduce the total number of PLBs and contain their service area. You are referring to this line, right? Yes. This is only to set a cap. You said the direction is to reduce the total number of PLBs. You said to contain and, when possible, reduce the total number of PLBs. A cap has been set. After the review, we decided to stay with the same cap. And this line at footnote only serves to explain that, where possible, the total number of PLBs would be reduced. In the same footnote, you mentioned road congestion in Hong Kong and the policy objective for PLBs. In the past decade or so, you cannot accuse the PLBs of contributing to the traffic jam. Nowadays, PLBs are no longer the cause of road congestion. Will the government consider relaxing the road restrictions? I will talk about the overall policy. On congestion, the government has compiled a report. I won't go into detail. The causes and solutions are multifaceted. It's not just because of the public light buses, but from a congestion or alleviation perspective, the lesser vehicles, the better. As long as we can meet the demand, it would be nice to reduce the number of vehicles. Some areas require a greater demand, and adjustments are required in others. Well, this is not my point. You asked whether restrictions on public light buses can be relaxed. by the same logic, we cannot just simply say we will maintain the number or reduce or increase it. A more practical way would be to communicate with the trade, considering the overall traffic situation. Certain relaxations can be made where possible. That's the general policy. Footnote 3 talks about red minibuses, and hopefully they can be covered. So this is an established policy. Over the past decade, we have seen significant increases in conversion from red to green minibuses. Green minibuses are on fixed routes. We impose restrictions on red minibuses because there weren't any restrictions at the first place. So you have to put it in a historical context. We want to encourage green minibuses instead of trying to impose restrictions on all PLBs. So that's the thinking behind the footnote. So the footnote actually targeted red minibuses. Mr. Poon Siu Ping, thank you. We agree with the paper in principle, but I want to know more. We have 4,350 minibuses. As I understand, around 3,000 odd green minibuses with the rest red minibuses, and I'd like to know about the number of drivers. Red minibus drivers are pretty much free, but there are requirements for green minibus drivers. Can you advise on the total number of PLB drivers? The trade has found it hard to recruit drivers. PLBs play an important role because they carry 1.8 million passengers. It's the can the recruitment meet the demand? Are there any requirements on the number of operating minibuses? The overall supply of PLB drivers is tense, but none of the route packages have to be cancelled due to a lack of drivers. Would there be multiple drivers for the same PLB? The TD can provide more details on that. They can advise on the situation of red minibus drivers. We have no information on the current number of green minibus drivers. As we know, the operators have done a lot in recruiting drivers, including raising salaries, retaining existing drivers, and hiring new ones. They would also hire part-time drivers to make up for drivers who quit. We understand that there's still a shortage of drivers in the trade. For full-day drivers, there's a shortage of 10 to 20%. However, they did hire part-time drivers to fill those vacancies. For the relaxation of restricted areas for red minibuses, sorry, I got it mixed up. Currently, there are 3,250 green buses and 1,100 red minibuses. So we have more than 4,000 drivers who rely on minibuses. The figure should be more than that. We have more than 4,000 light buses. How many of them are laid idle? For green minibuses, they should operate based on the approved timetable, so none of those vehicles should be idle. For red minibuses, since there are no fixed routes, we have no information on the actual deployment, and we have no figures on the number of idle vehicles. Mr. Jeremy Tam. Thank you. I want to follow up on the issue of vehicles or of licenses. For green minibuses, you said you would provide a timetable of operation. However, it doesn't mean that there would be enough vehicles to fulfill those licenses. They can deploy a lot of vehicles, and they can also deploy very few vehicles. For red minibuses, even though they have no fixed routes, the TD has all the information, such as licenses, vehicle registration, etc. You just have to do some cross-checking to see if they have a permit. And you can see whether the licenses have been renewed. This is certainly something you can do. Today, we're discussing whether they will be granted another year or another 5 years. You should get back to the subcommittee next time at the latest on the number of unused licenses. Can you make that promise? We are talking about a cap. The actual number of vehicles can be less than that. This is a cap on set as 4,350. Even if some licenses are idle or unused, the cap would not be affected. I do not agree. Let's assume that 4,000 licenses are unused. I haven't finished. Would there be unused licenses? The assistant director talked about the red minibuses. For green minibuses, if there are not enough vehicles, the headway requirements set by the TD cannot be met. Sometimes drivers might fall sick. But generally speaking, the number of vehicles should match the schedule. As for the issue of unused licenses, what is the cause? We are referring to people who decide not to operate after securing a license. I'm just even if all the procedures are made and the license is secured, it doesn't mean the PLB would operate. But this is irrelevant to the cap, which is the topic of discussion today.
Well, you don't know how many licenses are being used. Well, we don't know about the routes. Well, you have, of course, for green minibuses, I know the schedule. Now, let's say they apply for 10 licenses and they can function with 9. There may not be such a situation where the licenses are put away and not being used. Land-out taxis, I can tell you how many taxi licenses are not being used. And you may say that they pay the license fee, but they're not using the license. That's fine, but they have to bear the cost. I don't know how many there will be. If the number is insignificant, then it's fine. Maybe the number can be as high as 500. If this is the case, then we have to study how we can tackle the problem. I'm not suggesting that you give us the number, because you can't. By the time we meet again, I'm sure that we would have sufficient time to deal with the issues to assuage our concerns. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that this is really happening. Right? You got a question? Right, let's find out whether the department has got any information. I agree with the Deputy Secretary that the routing and the number of vehicles are going hand in hand for green minibuses, but the red minibuses would be different. You have 1,000 red minibuses licenses. You don't know how many licenses are being put to operational use. Now, Mr. Tam would be anxious to find out. By the time we meet next, you should be able to have the answer. Right, the department will have a look at this. Chairman, I don't think there is any controversy regarding the extension of the cap of 4,350. But people are discussing whether we should increase the carrying capacity. If we have more capacity, it would be a good idea. However, we are concerned that with the increase in the number of seats, the license fees might increase, and there will be more revenue for the operators. Will you strike a proper balance there? Will there be any reward for the passengers? Many drivers are telling us that with more seats, they would be working harder. Now, with the more hard work, will they get a better pay rise? The pay is really low. It is difficult to attract drivers. Will there be any wage mechanism to be put in place for the wages to be adjusted? The other thing is the interests of the passengers. If you have more seats, then certainly it would be more efficient. Will the passengers be able to get certain reimbursement in terms of higher revenue? I think the operators, the license holders, the drivers, as well as the passengers should be able to benefit from the policy. May I, Chairman? Right. The number of vehicles and the number of vehicles go hand in hand. I think Mr. Luk has got a very good point. In June, when we reported the discussion or the deliberations to the TAC, we did touch on this issue. Now, why is it that the administration considers it is worth considering increasing the carrying capacity? Number one, we can meet the demand, in particular during the rush hours. We should have sufficient demand to the supply to cope with the demand, and that is in keeping with our policy. As to whether we should share out the benefits, I think it's only fair for this to be brought up. Back in June, when we made available the information to the TAC, we saw this as an opportunity for the service to be upgraded. With higher revenue, the service should be upgraded. We also made some proposals for improvement, like the steps at the moment are pretty high, and we suggested that there would be an additional rung on the steps, and there should be more handrails. Now, for minibuses that they don't have any stop bell, we were suggesting this so that people don't have to yell at the driver to stop. And we'd like the trade to consider these measures. As we said, the operating conditions are difficult for the minibuses. 60% of the route packages are sustaining a loss. So these measures are not really increasing their revenue. It's just to alleviate the difficulties. But we would bring the ideas to the trade, and I hope that they would do something about the fare with an increase in the number of seats. Now, this has to be subject to legislative amendments. Now, with these measures in place, if there is an increase in revenue, then it would be time for them to consider the wages of the drivers. We do have regular meetings with the trade, and I'm sure that the honourable member can also relate this to the trade. Mr. Lam Cheuk Ting, Chairman, I'd like to take this opportunity to say this to the Deputy Secretary. I had some doubts about the increase in the carrying capacity. The doubts are basically that the increase in the number of seats on the minibuses would be beneficial to certain operators. But for others, since they don't have that kind of model, it would be detrimental to them. Some people in the trade raise all these doubts. I haven't got the opportunity to go into detail about it, but I'd just like to take this opportunity to bring this up with the Deputy Secretary. Now, if it is okay, I would be grateful if you can clarify on this matter. Deputy Secretary, grateful to Mr. Lam for seeking clarification. Indeed, there was a misunderstanding. If we have to formulate policy on the basis of a certain model, it would be far easier. Now, the model would be on the basis of the policies. Now, we have the 16-seaters on the road because of the government policy. Now, if we allow enough time, we're not worried about the market not being able to react to the policy. Now, we're not concerned about the number of seats that can be accommodated when we formulate the policy. Now, we did have the opportunity to clarify the matter back in June when we consider the idea of increasing the carrying capacity. We didn't consider the models of the vehicles. Next month, the administration would be happy to discuss with members this idea again. Or it's my turn next. The cap of 4,350 has been maintained, and the Deputy Secretary said many times that it is difficult to operate in minibuses. Over the past 5 years, the market share or the patronage has been pretty much stable, whereas the market share has dropped by 1.6% from 2010, from 16.5% to 14%. Basically, we are supportive of the idea of increasing the carrying capacity of the minibuses. Mr. Luk made the point a moment ago. I don't think it's time for us to share the benefits with the passengers. The reason why you want to increase the carrying capacity because we're running out of drivers. Let's say we need 10 buses for a route, and there is a shortfall of about 10-20% of drivers, and they only manage to put 8 vehicles into operation, and therefore the carrying capacity would be lower, and people will have to be waiting longer. If there is an increase in the carrying capacity, then it would be making up for the shortfall of drivers. That is only the palliative. The ultimate solution lies in the recruitment of drivers. But between 2010 and 2016, the patronage has remained the same, and the number would decline with the coming into operation of the railways. It is for you to designate the number of vehicles and the routes. The unions must be concerned about the wages of the drivers. The wages are coming down because otherwise the operators would be making a loss. If this goes on, it will be ever more difficult for them to hire the right number of drivers. So rather than increasing the carrying capacity, the administration has to look at the fares. You know about their books, how their budget, the books are looking. You must have some ideas. If they are sustaining a loss, how can they maintain the level of service? Well, that's only my personal view. And Mr. Jeremy Tam for the second time. Chairman, about a 5-year period. This is since 1976. It's been 4 decades. The number has been maintained at 4,350. The government is in support of a 19-seater. I support this myself. I would rather see the number set at 20 myself. So can you tell us roughly, if everything goes smoothly, how soon are we going to see the first 19-seater on the road? If everything goes smoothly, that is. Right, if everything goes smoothly, we come back next month and let members know about the results. And if this is supported, then we'll seek to amend the legislation. And in the first half of next year, we will be introducing the amendments. And once this is enacted, they can replace the vehicles straight away. It would take half a year for them to order their vehicles. So we're talking about the first half of 2018, the soonest. Right, that shouldn't present any problem. I was concerned about a 5-year period because within 5 years the dynamics can change in terms of operation, the frequencies. There may be changes that may be pretty fluid. We're not sure whether they will be replacing the vehicles straight away or not. Now, given all these uncertainties, I was concerned about the 5 years being too long. Now, you said that when necessary, you can bring this up for discussion sooner, but given the workload of the Transport Department. I'm wondering whether you would be able to bring this up again within 5 years.
我適宜㗎啦，因為如果係咁嘅話，就
I'm happy with the answer. Even with 5 years, it means that a review would be done after 3 years. I think that sounds right. I want to supplement what Ms. Lee said. In the market, there are two types of PLBs, long and short. For the long PLBs, seats can be added. So seats can be installed easily, and they can become 19-seaters. For shorter models, we have to wait till 2018 when new vehicles can be purchased. Anything to add? This is correct. Only 15% of the fleet currently in the market are long minibuses. That means for most PLBs, modifications must be made. Any other questions? If not, the government has heard from members. So we can prepare for further discussions in December. For the question from Wu Chi Wai, I think you can consider the third footnote. I think you can specify that you are referring to red minibuses. You can add the words red minibuses in the footnote. This would clarify things. If not, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.